The docking clamps locked onto the alien warship with a metallic shudder that echoed through the transport shuttle. Every screen inside the cabin displayed the same designation. Coalition battleship. Vigilant Spear. The Ore. Among soldiers, diplomats, and smugglers alike, another name had survived far longer. The Coffin Ship. No crew assigned to it had ever returned. Adrian Vale remained seated until the indicator turned green. Around him, Coalition guards shifted uneasily. None of them looked in his direction. It was easier to escort the last human if they pretended he was already a ghost. The hatch hissed open. Cold recycled air swept inside, carrying the faint smell of machine oil, sterilizing agents, and overheated circuitry. A ceremonial officer waited on the opposite side of the airlock, flanked by armed Marines whose polished armor reflected the harsh white lighting. Adrian Vale, the officer said, reading from a datapad. You are hereby transferred to Coalition military custody under the Treaty of Hesper Reach. Adrian stepped across the threshold. His boots touched the deck of the Vigilant Spear. The Coalition acknowledges you as the final surviving citizen of humanity. A pause. You are assigned as civilian military observer aboard this vessel until further notice. The officer lowered the datapad. Your likelihood of survival is considered statistically insignificant. One of the Marines quietly muttered something in his own language. Another answered with what sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Adrian simply nodded. I've heard worse welcomes. The ceremonial officer blinked, uncertain whether the human had made a joke. Without another word, the escort led him through corridors that looked far older than any active warship should. The walls bore layers of repaired battle scars beneath fresh paint. Emergency bulkheads carried mismatched serial numbers. Entire sections had obviously been replaced over decades. The ship looked less like a masterpiece of engineering and more like something that refused to die. Crew members stopped working as Adrian passed. Some stared openly. Others looked away. Several whispered. He recognized the expressions immediately. Curiosity, distrust, pity, not hatred. That surprised him. Eventually, the escort stopped before a pair of towering doors. The captain will receive you now. The doors parted silently. The bridge was enormous. Tiered command stations curved around a central tactical display, projecting a living map of nearby star systems. Every officer worked with practiced precision. No unnecessary conversation. No wasted movement. At the center stood the commanding officer, Commander Seraya Ilyth. She didn't turn immediately. She finished reviewing a tactical report before placing it on the command console. Only then did she face him. She was taller than Adrian expected, her posture perfectly straight without appearing rigid. Silver blue skin caught the overhead lighting in soft gradients, while delicate patterns along her temples glowed so faintly they could almost be mistaken for reflected light. Dark hair, woven into a precise braid, rested over one shoulder. Her violet eyes settled on him with measured calm. You are Adrian Vale, she said. I am. I expected someone older. I expected someone shorter. For the briefest instant, one corner of her mouth almost moved. Almost. Several officers exchanged startled glances. No one joked with Commander Ilyth. She descended from the command platform until they stood only a few feet apart. You understand why you are here. I've been told several versions. I prefer facts. So do I. Silence stretched between them. She studied him with the patience of someone accustomed to seeing through rehearsed performances. You know this vessel's reputation. I know people call it the Coffin Ship. They do. And her gaze never shifted. And reputations usually begin with real events. You aren't afraid. Adrian looked around the bridge instead of answering immediately. He noticed tiny inconsistencies. A navigation console had been rebuilt using incompatible hardware. One support column carried microscopic stress fractures. The lighting flickered almost imperceptibly every 43 seconds. Someone had been repairing problems instead of solving them. Finally, he looked back at her. "I've spent the last 3 years attending memorial services. There isn't much left for me to fear." No one spoke. Even the bridge seemed quieter. Seraya held his gaze several seconds longer before nodding once. "You will be assigned quarters." "I appreciate the hospitality. This is not hospitality," I noticed. Another almost smile threatened to appear before discipline buried it. She turned toward the bridge crew. "Resume operations." Conversations immediately resumed. Adrian followed an ensign toward the habitation decks. As they disappeared through the doors, the executive officer stepped closer to the commander. "Permission to speak freely, Commander." "Granted. He won't last a week." Seraya watched the closed doors. "I did not ask for predictions. The statistics. I have already read them." She returned to her station. "Continue preparations for departure." Far below the bridge, Adrian unpacked exactly 3 possessions: a worn photograph sealed beneath transparent polymer, an old mechanical wristwatch, a folding multi-tool scratched from decades of use. Nothing else had survived the war with him. He placed the photograph inside the small cabin. The image showed smiling faces beneath a blue sky that no longer belonged to anyone. A soft chime interrupted the silence. "Crewman," a voice announced through the speaker. "Report to Maintenance Deck 14. Adrian frowned. "I haven't even been issued a uniform." "Correction." The voice hesitated. "Human Observer, Maintenance Deck 14. The channel closed. He followed illuminated guidance strips through narrow corridors until the ship's polished military appearance gave way to exposed conduits and humming machinery. Heat rolled from massive reactor conduits. Engineers hurried between open access panels. Then came the explosion. A thunderous crack burst from somewhere beyond the reactor shielding. The deck lurched violently. Warning lights flooded the compartment with crimson flashes. Steam erupted from a ruptured coolant line, filling the passage with blinding white vapor. Crew members scattered. Someone screamed. An emergency blast door began descending. One engineer slipped. His leg became trapped beneath a fallen equipment frame only meters from the closing barrier. The others froze. Protocol demanded sealing the compartment before the reactor overload spread. Adrian didn't hesitate. He sprinted straight into the escaping steam. "Human!" someone shouted. "The door!" He ignored them. Dropping beside the trapped engineer, Adrian wedged his battered multi-tool beneath twisted metal and searched for leverage instead of brute force. His eyes darted across fractured supports. Load paths. Pressure points. Failure angles. "There," he whispered. He shifted the tool. The frame lifted just enough. "Move." The engineer dragged free. Adrian shoved him toward safety. The blast door slammed shut, barely a heartbeat after Adrian dove beneath it. Silence followed, broken only by heavy breathing. The rescued engineer stared at him in disbelief. "You calculated that?" Adrian wiped grease from his hands. "No." He glanced back at the sealed compartment. "I guessed." Far above, on the bridge, Commander Seraya received the emergency report. She read it once. Then she read the final line again. Human Observer entered a reactor breach against standing safety regulations. 1 crew member saved. Casualties, 0. For the first time in many years, something unexpected disturbed the perfect order she had built around herself. Not fear, not annoyance, curiosity. The maintenance bay smelled of scorched insulation and hot coolant long after the emergency ended. Repair drones drifted through the damaged compartment, spraying sealant across ruptured conduits while engineers replaced warped sections of piping. Adrian remained where he was until everyone else had work to do. Only then did he retrieve his multi-tool from the floor and fold it closed. The engineer whose life he had saved approached slowly. He was broad-shouldered, his dark bronze skin patterned with narrow bands that shimmered whenever he moved. One of his lower arms was wrapped in a pressure bandage. You ignored every emergency protocol. Adrian shrugged. I noticed. You should have died. I've been told that twice today. The engineer stared at him before releasing a rough laugh. You really are human. I've heard that all my life. Before either could say more, footsteps echoed through the compartment. Every engineer straightened. Commander Seraya entered without ceremony. Her uniform remained immaculate despite the industrial surroundings. The faint light beneath the markings along her temples revealed nothing of what she thought. Her eyes settled first on the damaged reactor wall, then on Adrian. I have reviewed the incident. He nodded. So have I. You entered a reactor breach without authorization. I did. You endangered yourself. I did. You also prevented the loss of a senior engineer. I suppose I did that too. Silence settled between them. Several nearby crew members discreetly slowed their work, pretending not to listen. Seraya looked toward the rescued engineer. Your assessment. The engineer answered immediately. I would be dead. You are certain? Completely. She returned her attention to Adrian. Why? He frowned. What do you mean? You did not know him. No. You owe this crew nothing. True. You believed the compartment would seal before you escaped. I hoped. She took another step closer. That is not an explanation. Adrian leaned lightly against the maintenance console. My people had an old saying. Her expression invited him to continue. If someone can still be saved, you don't stand around calculating whether they're worth saving. A faint murmur passed among the nearby engineers. One quietly lowered his eyes. Seraya watched Adrian for another long moment. You think differently than coalition officers. I've noticed. Without another word, she turned. The human observer will continue unrestricted movement throughout non-classified sections of the vessel. Several officers blinked. That privilege normally took months to earn. As she reached the doorway, she paused without looking back. Try not to dismantle my ship. I'll do my best. I suspect your best concerns me. I can't promise otherwise. For the second time that day, the smallest trace of amusement softened her features before discipline reclaimed them. She disappeared into the corridor. Later that evening, Adrian wandered through the ship alone. The Vigilant Spear fascinated him. It wasn't elegant. It was stubborn. Different generations of technology lived side by side. Entire corridors had been rebuilt around older structural frames instead of replacing them. Junction boxes carried handwritten maintenance markings in half a dozen alien languages. He stopped beside an observation window. Stars drifted beyond the reinforced glass. Beautiful, silent, deadly. Footsteps approached behind him. I expected to find you asleep. He turned. Seraya stood several meters away. I don't sleep well on my first day. Neither do most new officers. I've never been one for traditions. She joined him at the viewport. For several minutes, neither spoke. The stars were conversation enough. Finally, she broke the silence. Do humans always rush toward danger? No. Her eyes shifted toward him. Only the foolish ones. And you? I haven't decided yet. Another pause. You inspected the maintenance deck. I did. You noticed things. I usually do. What did you see? Adrian folded his arms. This ship doesn't have one major problem. No? It has hundreds. She remained perfectly still. The repairs aren't wrong. They've kept the vessel operational. They've kept it alive. He pointed toward the ceiling. Someone has been fixing failures one at a time, instead of asking why they keep happening. You believe there's a common cause? I think someone's treating symptoms. She studied him carefully. Our engineering divisions have spent years investigating. I know. You believe you found something they missed after one walk through the ship? No. He smiled slightly. I think I found enough to start asking better questions. Seraya looked back toward the stars. For reasons she couldn't explain, his confidence never sounded arrogant. It sounded practical, dangerously practical. The following morning, alarms interrupted breakfast. Combat alert. Every corridor erupted into motion. Crew members sprinted toward battle stations. Adrian stepped aside until a young communications officer nearly collided with him. "Bridge!" she gasped. "Move!" He followed the flow upward. Nobody stopped him. By the time he reached the bridge, the main display had transformed into a tactical projection. Red contacts. 8 of them. Fast. Closing. The executive officer spoke sharply. Unidentified vessels accelerating. The tactical officer answered. They're not answering hails. Another station lit up. Confirmed weapons lock. Seraya stood at the center of the bridge. Raise defensive screens. Power transferred. Launch warning drones. They've destroyed the first drone. The tactical display flashed. They're firing. The ship trembled violently. Warning lights ignited across multiple stations. Hull impact. Forward shields dropping. Port batteries offline. The executive officer looked towards Seraya. They're targeting our propulsion. Adrian watched the enemy formation. His eyes narrowed. Something felt wrong. The attackers weren't concentrating fire. They were herding the Vigilant Spear. He stepped toward the command platform. They don't want to destroy us. Every officer turned. The executive officer frowned. This is a combat bridge. I noticed. Seraya met Adrian's eyes. Explain. They're leaving one escape vector open. The tactical officer enlarged the battlefield. Adrian pointed. Right there. Silence spread across the bridge. The enemy formation shifted, exactly as Adrian predicted. They're steering us. The tactical officer looked up. He's correct. Seraya never took her eyes off the display. Destination. Adrian studied the star chart. Then his expression hardened. They're driving us into the ion debris field. The executive officer's face lost its color. No navigation system functions properly in there. Adrian nodded. Which means they don't need to beat your ship. He looked toward the approaching enemy vessels. They just need the Vigilant Spear to finish what everyone already believes it does. The bridge fell silent. For the first time since the battle began, Commander Seraya realized the attack wasn't random. Someone wasn't trying to destroy her ship. Someone wanted the Coffin Ship to claim another crew. The bridge settled into a silence more unsettling than the alarms. Every officer stared at the tactical display while the enemy formation tightened around the Vigilant Spear. The red markers moved with deliberate precision, leaving only the corridor that led straight toward the ion debris field. Commander Seraya's voice cut through the tension. Helm, alter course 20 degrees port. The navigator complied. They're matching our turn. The enemy ships shifted instantly. Starboard, 15. Again, the attackers mirrored the maneuver. The executive officer folded his hands behind his back. They've anticipated every standard evasive pattern. Adrian watched the display instead of the enemy vessels. They're not anticipating. He pointed toward the projected battlefield. They already know the response matrix. Several heads turned. Seraya looked at him. Explain. They know coalition doctrine. The realization spread across the bridge like a slow-moving shockwave. Every tactical decision taught at coalition academies followed carefully documented procedures. Against ordinary opponents, consistency created discipline. Against someone who had studied those procedures, it became predictability. The tactical officer swallowed. They're reading us. They're expecting you, Adrian replied. Seraya didn't hesitate. Helm, Commander, Cancel every standard maneuver package. Confusion flickered across several stations. The executive officer frowned. Commander? She kept her eyes on Adrian. You recognized the pattern. I did. What would a human do? Adrian smiled faintly. Probably something that would earn a lecture. Good. She folded her hands behind her back. Earn one. A few startled glances swept across the bridge. She had just invited advice from a civilian. Adrian stepped beside the tactical display. They expect smooth acceleration. He traced a path through the hologram. Instead, his finger stopped abruptly. Cut main engines. The helm officer blinked. They'll overshoot. They'll adjust. Not before momentum carries them forward. The executive officer looked unconvinced. Then what? Adrian pointed toward the port flank. Rotate the ship. We'll expose damaged armor. For 6 seconds, he looked toward Seraya. Can your port rail batteries still fire manually? The tactical officer answered before she could. They're disconnected from central targeting. Adrian nodded. Perfect. Silence followed. Perfect? The executive officer repeated. If they can't connect to your computers, he looked directly at the tactical officer. They can't predict them. Understanding spread across the bridge. Seraya gave the order immediately. Execute. The massive warship abruptly killed its forward thrust. Artificial gravity fluctuated as inertia pulled against the internal compensators. Outside, the pursuing ships surged ahead exactly as Adrian predicted. They're passing us. Rotate. The Vigilant Spear pivoted heavily. Damaged armor groaned. Warning lights flashed across engineering consoles. The tactical officer shouted, "Manual targeting online." Adrian looked through the forward viewport instead of the sensors. There, he pointed. The middle ship. The tactical officer hesitated. We don't have a firing solution. You don't need one. What? Trust your eyes. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Seraya spoke. Fire. The port rail batteries erupted. Heavy tungsten slugs crossed the void at terrifying speed. The lead pirate vessel tried to evade. Too late. One projectile punched completely through its engine assembly. The ship spun violently before disappearing into a cloud of expanding debris. A stunned silence filled the bridge. Then, direct hit. They're breaking formation. They didn't expect that. Adrian exhaled slowly. They've stopped herding us. The remaining attackers scattered, abandoning their carefully controlled pattern. Seraya immediately seized the opportunity. Helm, full thrust. Engineering confirms. Bring us above the debris field. The great engines roared. For the first time since the attack began, the Vigilant Spear dictated the battle instead of reacting to it. The engagement lasted another 18 minutes. Without their carefully planned trap, the pirates lost coordination. 1 fled. 2 surrendered. The remaining vessels attempted desperate attacks before coalition gunnery disabled them one by one. When the final enemy ship drifted powerless through space, the bridge erupted into restrained celebration. No cheering, no shouting. Only relieved breaths and exhausted smiles. The executive officer slowly turned toward Adrian. You've received tactical training. I have. Coalition? No. Human military? Adrian nodded once. The executive officer was quiet for several seconds. I understand now. What? Why humanity was feared? Adrian's expression didn't change. We weren't. You should have been. Hours later, damage reports continued throughout the ship. Engineering crews hurried through corridors, carrying replacement components, while medical teams treated the injured. Adrian wandered toward the observation gallery again. He found Seraya already there. She stood with her hands lightly resting behind her back, watching distant stars drift beyond the transparent alloy. You knew I'd come here. I suspected. You wanted privacy. She looked sideways. I wanted honesty. Adrian joined her beside the viewport. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, she broke the silence. You saved my ship. I helped. You changed the outcome. So did your crew. They followed because I ordered them. He looked toward the stars. They followed because they trusted you enough to try something unfamiliar. Her gaze lingered on his profile. You give credit away easily. My people usually worked in teams. You speak of humanity in the past. There isn't much present left. The words settled heavily between them. For the first time since meeting him, Seraya allowed herself to imagine what that truly meant. Every childhood memory, every familiar face, every language spoken at home, gone. He carried an entire civilization alone. Without thinking, she reached toward him. Her fingers stopped only a breath from his hand. She realized what she was doing. Slowly, she withdrew. I apologize. For what? My species values distance. I noticed. Her lips curved into the smallest genuine smile he'd seen. It isn't personal. I didn't think it was. Another comfortable silence settled between them. The stars reflected softly across the glass. So, Adrian said quietly, how many captains served this ship before you? Her expression became guarded again. 7. And all died. Yes. In battle. Some. The others? No explanation was ever found. He nodded thoughtfully. I don't believe in cursed ships. Neither do I. But, she looked out into space once more. I believe someone has benefited from everyone believing this one is cursed. Adrian turned toward her. It was the first time she had voiced the suspicion aloud. Their eyes met. Not commander and observer. Not alien and human. Two people searching for the same truth. A proximity alert interrupted the moment. The bridge called immediately. Commander, report to tactical. Her expression sharpened. On my way. She took 2 steps before stopping. Without turning around, she spoke quietly. I'm glad they sent you here. Adrian smiled. I don't think they intended that as a compliment. No. She glanced back over her shoulder. I don't believe they intended it at all. She disappeared into the corridor, leaving Adrian alone with the stars. For the first time since boarding the Vigilant Spear. He had the unmistakable feeling that surviving this assignment might be far more dangerous than dying on it. 3 days passed without another attack. For the crew of the Vigilant Spear. That alone felt unnatural. The warship drifted through a sparsely charted sector while repair teams worked around the clock. Damaged armor plates disappeared beneath fresh composite panels. Reactor output returned to normal. The bridge resumed its measured rhythm. Yet something subtle had changed. Crew members no longer stepped aside when Adrian entered a compartment. They nodded. Some even greeted him. The first time an engineer asked, "What do you think?" before beginning a repair, Adrian realized respect had quietly replaced suspicion. Deep inside engineering, the chief engineer knelt beside an open plasma regulator. I've replaced this assembly 6 times. He tightened a connector before looking toward Adrian. Every diagnostic says it's functioning. But it keeps failing. Adrian crouched beside him. Instead of examining the regulator, he studied the mounting brackets. Then the surrounding conduit. Then the vibration dampeners attached to the deck. You've been replacing the wrong part. The engineer frowned. The regulator is what's burning out, because something else is shaking it apart. He tapped one of the dampeners with a wrench. The dull metallic sound immediately stood out. This one's cracked. It passed inspection. It passed a visual inspection. Adrian held out the wrench. Hit the next one. The engineer did. A clear, solid tone answered. His eyes widened. That explains months of failures. It explains why replacing regulators never worked. The engineer looked at Adrian with open disbelief. You don't think like an engineer. I used to be one. You were a soldier. I became one. The engineer laughed. I suddenly understand why humans gave everyone headaches. On the bridge, Commander Seraya watched the maintenance report appear on her console. Recurring plasma instability resolved. Root cause identified after 17 minutes. She read the attached notes twice. The repair itself was simple. Finding the actual problem had taken coalition specialists nearly 4 years without success. The executive officer noticed her expression. The human again? She nodded once. He keeps asking different questions. That concerns you? It fascinates me. That evening, Seraya requested Adrian's presence in her ready room. He entered after the door chimed. You asked for me. I did. The room reflected its owner. Everything had its place. No unnecessary decoration. A single shelf held navigation charts dating back generations. One wall displayed a ceremonial blade. Another overlooked the stars beyond the hull. She gestured toward a chair. Sit. I thought commanders preferred standing conversations. I prefer efficient ones. He sat. She remained by the viewport. When I graduated from the Naval Academy, her voice carried an unusual softness. I was taught there is always a correct procedure. Adrian listened without interrupting. I believed that for many years. And now? Now I command a ship that has survived by breaking every expectation except the ones written in manuals. She finally turned toward him. You see possibilities where my officers see limitations. My officers used to do the opposite. You miss them. I miss arguing with them. Her eyes lingered on his face. You rarely speak about your past. There isn't anyone left to correct my version of it. The words settled heavily between them. Seraya crossed the room and stopped beside the small table separating them. You carry your losses quietly. I don't know any other way. For a long moment, neither moved. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It simply existed between them. She reached toward the table, her fingertips brushing the worn mechanical wristwatch resting beside Adrian's hand. You still use this? It belonged to my father. It no longer keeps perfect time. It doesn't have to. He smiled faintly. It only has to remind me that time keeps moving. Her gaze softened. Among her people, physical closeness outside family bonds was uncommon, yet she found herself unwilling to step away. She could see the tiny scar along his jaw, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, earned by years of smiling before years of war had taken that habit away. You look at people, she said quietly, as though you're trying to understand them. I am. Why? Understanding someone usually solves more problems than fighting them. She searched his expression. And if it doesn't, then at least you know why you're fighting. The ship shuddered. Not violently, just enough for both of them to notice. The intercom chimed. Commander, unusual power fluctuation detected on Deck 9. She straightened immediately. Source, unknown. We're investigating. Seraya tapped the console. I'm on my way. Adrian rose with her. So am I. She looked at him. You've become accustomed to involving yourself. I've become accustomed to your ship needing help. The corner of her mouth lifted. You continue earning lectures. I was beginning to miss them. Deck 9 housed long-range sensor arrays. When they arrived, security teams had already sealed the corridor. Panels flickered erratically. The smell of burned circuitry lingered in the air. The chief engineer knelt beside an access hatch. This wasn't a malfunction. He looked up. Someone disconnected the safety interlocks manually. The executive officer's expression hardened. Sabotage. A murmur spread among the gathered officers. Seraya examined the opened panel. No forced entry. They had authorization, or access. Adrian slowly walked the length of the corridor. He wasn't looking at the damaged equipment. He was looking at the floor. "What is it?" Seraya asked. He crouched near a maintenance cart. "These marks." Tiny scratches crossed the deck plating, barely visible. He traced one with a fingertip. This cart was moved after the explosion. The chief engineer frowned. "We didn't touch it." "I know." Adrian stood. "Someone used it to block this camera." He pointed upward. A security lens overlooked the entire junction. The cart's position would have hidden anyone working on the panel. The executive officer immediately checked the recording. Static. Exactly 12 minutes missing. Seraya's eyes narrowed. Someone knew our surveillance layout. "They also knew your repair schedules," Adrian replied. "Otherwise, they couldn't have timed this." The implication settled over the group. This wasn't an outside attack. Someone aboard the Vigilant Spear wanted the ship to fail. Later that night, the bridge lights dimmed to their evening cycle. Most of the crew had rotated off duty. Adrian found Seraya standing alone near the panoramic viewport once again. "You don't sleep much. Neither do you." He joined her. Below them, a blue-white nebula stretched across the darkness like drifting silk. "It's beautiful," he said. "It is." She hesitated. Then, without looking at him, she spoke. "When you first came aboard, I expected you to become another name in the ship's history. And now?" She turned toward him. Now there was no command mask. Only honesty. "Now I find myself hoping history chooses differently." Their eyes met. Neither spoke. The distance between them had become almost imperceptible, close enough to hear each other's breathing. Close enough that, for a single suspended heartbeat, the vastness of space beyond the viewport seemed very far away. A sharp, alert tone shattered the quiet. The tactical display flashed crimson across the bridge. "Commander!" The communications officer's voice carried unmistakable urgency. "We've intercepted a priority coalition transmission." It wasn't addressed to us. It wasn't meant for us. She swallowed. But someone just ordered the destruction of the Vigilant Spear. The bridge fell silent. No one spoke for several long seconds after the communications officer finished. Commander Seraya stepped toward the console. "Play it again." The recording filled the bridge. Priority authorization confirmed. A burst of encrypted static interrupted the transmission. The Vigilant Spear must not reach Coalition Assembly. Confirm termination under Contingency 9. The signal dissolved into interference before returning for one final sentence. No survivors. Silence followed. The communications officer looked up. "That's everything we recovered." The executive officer's voice was low. Contingency 9 doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in any database available to this vessel. Seraya corrected. Adrian folded his arms. "Meaning someone hid it?" She nodded once. "Or erased it." The bridge doors opened. The chief engineer entered, carrying a data module inside a sealed evidence container. "I found this behind the damaged sensor panel." He placed it on the tactical table. "It wasn't part of our systems." Seraya studied the container. "Can we read it?" "Eventually." The engineer hesitated. It was designed to destroy itself if removed. Adrian looked closer. Not quite. The engineer raised an eyebrow. "What do you see?" "The casing isn't military." "No. It's maintenance equipment." Several officers leaned closer. The person who installed it wanted technicians to overlook it. Adrian pointed toward the connector pins. They expected anyone who found it to plug it directly into a diagnostic port. The engineer frowned. "That's standard procedure. And it would trigger the self-destruct." Realization crossed the engineer's face. "So we don't connect it?" Adrian smiled. "We power it externally." Within minutes, the engineering team assembled an isolated power rig. The data module activated without detonating. Lines of encrypted information appeared across the display. The chief engineer's expression slowly changed from concentration to disbelief. "Commander," he looked up. "This isn't sabotage software." "What is it?" "A recording archive." Hours later, a secure briefing assembled in the captain's ready room. Only senior officers attended. The doors sealed. The lights dimmed. The recovered archive projected into the center of the table. Rows of dates, crew manifests, mission reports. Every commander who had served aboard the Vigilant Spear. The executive officer frowned. These files were erased decades ago. The archive continued. Video recordings appeared. One showed a bridge remarkably similar to their own. Another commander. Another crew. Another emergency. The recording ended with explosions throughout the ship. Then another. And another. Different captains. Different officers. Always the same pattern. Critical system failures. Communications disrupted. Rescue arriving too late. The medical officer broke the silence. "Those weren't accidents." "No," Adrian said quietly. "They were executions." Seraya replayed one of the final recordings. Just before the bridge exploded, an officer spoke into a recorder. "We found evidence inside the navigation core." His breathing sounded strained. "They lied about the human war." Static overwhelmed the recording. Then it ended forever. No one in the room moved. The executive officer finally spoke. The archive was hidden. "Because someone expected another crew to discover it," Adrian replied, "and die before reporting it." Seraya looked toward the recovered files again. The ship wasn't cursed. No, it carried evidence. The kind people kill to bury. The room emptied gradually as officers returned to their stations. Only Adrian and Seraya remained. She stood beside the viewport, watching distant stars drift past. "I commanded this vessel for 4 years." She spoke without turning. "I buried 73 crew members." Adrian remained silent. "I believed every investigation." She closed her eyes briefly. "I attended every memorial." Her shoulders lowered slightly. "And all this time," she couldn't finish. Adrian stepped beside her. "You weren't the one who planted the explosives." "No. You weren't the one hiding the truth." She looked at him. "I still led them. You also kept this ship alive long enough for someone to uncover what happened." Their eyes met. The weight she carried didn't disappear, but it shifted, just enough. She released a slow breath. "My people aren't comfortable with uncertainty. My people usually lived in it." A faint smile appeared. "I've noticed." The silence between them no longer felt guarded. Seraya studied his face, searching for the quiet confidence that seemed to steady everyone around him. "I judged you before we met. I expected that. I was wrong. So was I." She tilted her head. "About what?" "I expected someone cold. And I found someone carrying more responsibility than anyone should." For a heartbeat, neither looked away. Seraya slowly reached toward him. This time, she didn't stop. Her fingertips rested lightly against his hand. A simple touch, warm, tentative, foreign to both of them for different reasons. Adrian didn't move. He simply turned his hand enough for their fingers to rest together. Neither rushed the moment, neither spoke. Outside the viewport, stars flowed silently across the darkness while the ship drifted onward. The bridge, the war, and the conspiracy all seemed impossibly distant. Until the intercom shattered the quiet. "Commander," the communications officer sounded breathless. "We've detected multiple hyperspace signatures." Seraya immediately withdrew her hand. Duty returned as naturally as breathing. "How many?" A pause. 43. The captain and Adrian exchanged one look. That number was impossible for pirates. They hurried onto the bridge. The tactical display illuminated the room in crimson. One by one, hostile contacts emerged from hyperspace. Not scavengers, not raiders. Warships, identical, moving with perfect formation. The executive officer's face hardened. Those are coalition designs. The tactical officer zoomed in. No identification beacons. They've disabled them. Adrian stared at the formation. They don't want witnesses. The communications officer tried every frequency. No response. Seraya stepped onto the command platform. Raise every shield. Maximum output. Signal coalition command. Jamming across all channels. The enemy fleet accelerated. The bridge trembled as targeting alarms erupted simultaneously. 43 firing solutions locked onto the Vigilant Spear. The executive officer looked toward his captain. They've brought an execution fleet. Seraya remained perfectly still. Then she looked at Adrian, not as an observer, not as a guest. As the one person aboard who consistently saw what others missed. What aren't we seeing? Adrian studied the tactical display. His eyes lingered on the enemy formation. Then, very slowly, he smiled. They've made one mistake. Every officer turned toward him. They assumed we'd react like every captain before us. The bridge waited. No one interrupted the silence after Adrian spoke. They assumed we'd react like every captain before us. Commander Seraya stepped down from the command platform until she stood beside him. What do you see? He enlarged the tactical projection. 43 hostile warships advanced in immaculate formation, their lines mathematically perfect. They've built this operation around certainty. The executive officer frowned. Explain. They know coalition doctrine. They know this ship. They know how previous captains responded. His finger traced a path between the enemy formations. They've planned for discipline. He looked up. They haven't planned for trust. Seraya understood before anyone else did. You want to separate command authority. I want to decentralize it. The bridge officers exchanged uncertain glances. Coalition warships relied on centralized command. Every order flowed from the captain through the tactical network. Adrian proposed the opposite. Give every department authority to improvise within broad objectives, he said. The engineers solve engineering problems without waiting for permission. The Marines defend where they judge necessary. The gunnery crews fire when they have opportunities instead of requesting authorization. The executive officer looked horrified. That borders on chaos. It does. Adrian met his gaze calmly. So does combat. Seraya didn't hesitate. Transmit revised command authority. Several officers froze. Commander, now. The communications officer swallowed. Yes, Commander. Across the Vigilant Spear. Encrypted orders reached every department. For the first time in the vessel's long history, initiative became official policy. The hostile fleet opened fire. Brilliant lances of energy crossed the darkness. The Vigilant Spear rolled hard to port as shields absorbed the first barrage. Forward shields down to 71%. Return fire. The gunnery crews didn't wait for detailed targeting solutions. Independent batteries selected different threats. Instead of concentrating on a single ship, they disrupted multiple attack patterns simultaneously. Enemy commanders hesitated. Their predictions no longer matched reality. In engineering, the chief engineer ignored a request to preserve reactor reserves. He diverted everything into maneuvering thrusters. The old battleship surged sideways with impossible acceleration. On the marine deck, security teams reinforced vulnerable bulkheads before damage reports reached the bridge. In medical, casualty stations were established before the first wounded arrived. Every department anticipated instead of reacted. The ship came alive, not as a machine following orders, as a crew thinking together. A violent explosion rocked the stern. Lights flickered. The tactical officer looked up. Direct hit. Engine 3 offline. The executive officer turned towards Seraya. "We should withdraw." Adrian shook his head. "No. They outnumber us. They're counting on that." He pointed toward the center of the hostile formation. "Look at their flagship." Seraya narrowed her eyes. "It hasn't fired. It isn't commanding." "What?" "It's observing." He enlarged the vessel. "They expect confirmation that we're destroyed." A slow realization spread across the bridge. "This isn't a battle," Seraya said. "It's an inspection." Adrian nodded. "They've destroyed this ship before." He looked around the bridge. "They're making sure they don't fail this time." Another volley struck. This one penetrated weakened shields. The deck lurched violently. Warning sirens screamed. Hull breach. Sections 12 and 13. Damage control responding. Before anyone issued instructions, reports began arriving. Hull sealed. Fire contained. Life support stable. The executive officer stared at the display. "They're solving problems before we ask." Adrian smiled. They stopped waiting for permission. The enemy flagship finally moved. It advanced through its own formation with deliberate confidence. A transmission arrived. Audio only. A calm voice filled the bridge. "Commander of the Vigilant Spear." Seraya answered. "This is Commander Seraya Ilyth. You have discovered material belonging to Coalition intelligence. It belongs to the families of every crew you murdered." A pause. "You misunderstand history." "No. You rewrote it." Silence. Then, "Surrender the archive." Seraya looked toward Adrian. He gave the smallest shake of his head. She faced the console again. "No." The transmission ended. The flagship's weapons began charging. The first impact shook the ship harder than anything before. Consoles erupted in sparks. Bridge officers struggled to remain standing. The medical officer rushed toward an injured navigator. A second blast followed almost immediately. This one struck the command deck directly. The overhead structure groaned. Fragments of alloy crashed across the bridge. Seraya pushed a junior officer clear of falling debris. A jagged support beam struck her shoulder. She hit the deck hard. "Commander!" Adrian reached her first. Blood darkened the sleeve of her uniform. She tried to stand. Her left arm refused to move. The medical officer knelt beside her. Fractured clavicle. Another alarm interrupted him. Bridge structural integrity failing. The executive officer looked between the tactical display and his wounded commander. "Orders." Seraya tried to answer. Pain stole the words. Outside, the hostile fleet closed relentlessly. The bridge had seconds. She looked up at Adrian. There was no hesitation in her eyes, only certainty. By emergency authority. She drew a careful breath. "I transfer tactical command." The executive officer stared. "Commander." To Adrian Vale. Silence swept across the bridge. Every officer understood what those words meant. The last human, sent aboard to die, now commanded the Coalition's infamous Coffin Ship. No one protested, no one questioned it, because every person on that bridge had already seen him earn their trust. Adrian looked at Seraya. "I'll bring them home." She held his gaze. "I know." He stepped onto the command platform. For a brief instant, he rested one hand on the worn railing, polished smooth by generations of captains who had never survived. Then he faced the bridge. His voice remained calm, no louder than before. "Helm, Commander." The title came naturally. "Take us straight toward the flagship." Several officers blinked. The executive officer's eyes widened. "Straight at them. They believe we're trying to survive." A faint smile crossed Adrian's face. "Let's disappoint them." Around the bridge, tired officers exchanged determined looks. Fear remained. So did exhaustion, but something stronger had taken root. Hope. The Vigilant Spear. The accelerated. For the first time in decades, the so-called Coffin Ship was no longer fleeing the fate others had written for it. It was carrying a human commander into the heart of the fleet that had expected him to become another forgotten casualty.